wants to do code in 5? 5 minutes for code? Oh, hell. Bring it, boy. Code in 5. What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Code in 5. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host, and welcome to the podcast where we try to analyze the National Electrical Code in 5 minutes or less. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at temperature limitations and equipment provisions under 110.14c1. And we're only going to be dealing with A today. That is terminal provisions for equipment for circuits rated 100 amperes or less or marked 14 AWG through 1 AWG conductors, because I've only got 5 minutes to do this in. So let's kind of discuss it. So what is a temperature limitation? So the temperature rating associated with the ampacity of a conductor shall be selected and coordinated so as not to exceed the lowest temperature rating of any connected termination, conductor, or device. Again, that is the weakest link theory. Now, if I have a device that's got a 60-degree rated terminals and have an overcurrent protected device that has 75-degree rated terminals, and I have a conductor with an insulation rating, let's say, of 90 degrees C, I can't use the ampacity values of the 90 degrees C when it comes to the weakest link of the terminals. The terminal is only good for 60, so my ampacity can't exceed 60 degree column under 310.16 for ampacity. Okay, so we're locked into that because of the weakest link, and that's what 110.14c said. Now, but what about that 90 degree rated insulation? It goes on to say conductors with temperature ratings higher than specified for terminations. Again, we said it was 60-degree terminal, and we're using 90-degree rated insulation. It says shall be permitted to be used for ampacity adjustments, corrections, or both. So, can I use 90-degree rated insulation and maybe I have an adjustment and correction? Absolutely. The code is telling me I can do that. But I got to remember that even after those adjustment and corrections, I still have to make sure I have a conductor, one, that can handle the load, and two, my load can't exceed the value under the 60-degree column because that is my weakest link. That's what the terminals are rated for. But I can use a higher rated insulated conductor in order to achieve this to account for adjustment and correction. Now, under the equipment provisions, here's what it says. It says the determination of terminal provisions of equipment shall be based on 110.14c1a or c1b. We're going to do c1a today. It says, unless the equipment is listed and marked otherwise, and that is an important statement because usually it is, it says conductor ampacities used in determining equipment termination provisions shall be based on table 310.16, which is our ampacity table, as appropriately modified by 310.12, which is the 83% rule for conductor sizing for feeders and services. Not what we're talking about today. So let's talk about A, as 110.14c1a, terminal provisions. Now, if the equipment has terminals and it's rated 100 amperes or less, or the conductors that are terminating are size 14 through 1 gauge, then they shall apply to either 1, 2, 3, or 4 under 110.14c1a. Okay, so if we don't know what the device terminals are rated, we don't know what the overcurrent device is rated for terminals, again, could happen, then we know that if the conductors are between 14 and 1, or if it's 100 amperes or less, then our ampacity value is going to be very much in line with the 60 degree, and we're going to use at least 60 degree rated insulated conductors. Now, number 2 says, okay, what if I still don't know those terminal limitations? Maybe it's an old device. I can't see what the temperature rating is on it, and I can't see what the rating is on the circuit breaker, but I do know that the conductor falls between 14 and 1, or it's 100 amps or less, which seems to tell me that I have to stay in the 60 degree ampacity column of 310.16. And you're right, but this says that I can use an insulation of a higher temperature rating. So I could use a 75 or even a 90 rated insulation, but I still, because I don't know what the weakest links are, I'm still going to be limited to the ampacity under the 60 degree column. Okay. Now, number 3 is the one that me and you deal with the most, because typically you might have a receptacle that's rated 60/75, and you might have an overcurrent device that's rated 60/75. So I'm going to use the 75. Now, granted, those conductors that are terminating on it might fall within the 14 to 1 gauge or 100 amps or less. However, because of number 3, here's what it says. It says conductors with a higher temperature rating, thus the 90 degree C, for example, it says conductors with a higher temperature rating if the equipment is listed and identified for use with such conductors. So if I've got a receptacle that's rated for 75 degree termination, and I've got a circuit breaker, let's say, that's rated for 75 degree termination, and I'm using an insulated conductor that's equal to 75 degrees C or higher, in this case, let's say it's 90, then I can use the ampacity values under the 75 degree column under 310.16, even though the conductors fall between 14 and 1 gauge or 100 amps or less, okay? we're good to go. So that's what you and me probably do on a regular basis. Now, don't confuse that with the requirements for things like non-metallic sheath cable, which has its own limitations in 334.80, which is going to limit you to the 60-degree column, even though you can use 90 for adjustment and correction purposes. Don't get confused. We're talking individual conductors here, normal applications. The cable requirements under those specific articles are going to give you your own requirements. Lastly, we're talking about motors. Now, if you're dealing with a design B, C, or D motor, then it says the conductors having an insulation rating of 75 degrees C or higher shall be permitted to be used. But you got to remember, even if you use those, you can't exceed the ampacity value under the 75 degrees C column of 310.16. So it's going to allow you to use an insulation that's rated higher than the 60 degree, because those terminals for motors on a B, C, and D design typically are rated 75 degrees C. So it's okay. But it is reminding you, though, again, at the end of the day, you can't exceed the value under the 75 degree column. So even if we do adjustment and corrections using a 90 degree rated insulation, we still can't exceed that of the 75 degrees C. We have to make sure our load doesn't exceed it, but we also need to make sure that after adjustment and corrections, that our conductor can still handle the load necessary to get the job done. Hopefully you got something. Again, I went over 5 minutes, but the best I can do on this one. It's a very deep topic. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.
Can we do code in 5? Who wants to do code in 5?